On a stormy, rainy night, after standing for an hour in the parking lot of a completely unfamiliar supermarket, miles away from home, I began to feel uneasy. My daughter-in-law said she was going to get gas and would come back to pick me up, but it seemed she had no intention of keeping that promise. Worse still, my wallet, handbag, and phone were all left in her car. While I was starting to panic a little and my hands and feet began to tremble, my adorable Eskimo dog cleverly helped me find the way back home. To find out what really happened to a 65-year-old woman like me, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and follow my life story. You won't be disappointed. Most mornings I wake up before the sun. The house is quiet, the kind of silence that makes me feel both safe and a little lonely. This old estate is big and heavy with time. My husband bought it long ago when his business was doing so well that he thought nothing could ever stop him. He has been gone for more than 10 years now, yet I still feel him here. Sometimes I catch his presence in the smell of polished wood, in the echo of my steps across the long hallway, or when I look at the tall windows where he used to stand and watch the trees. It is strange how the memory can hurt and comfort me at the same time. People think this house is everything I have. They do not know the truth. I still own other buildings, shops, and offices that bring in steady money every month. I also keep investment accounts that grow quietly in the background. I never told my son or his wife about these things. It is safer that way. They believe this estate is the last piece left, the treasure they are waiting to inherit. I let them think so. Pretending to be the fragile widow is easier than showing them the strong side of me that never went away. Having my own money makes me feel free. When I walk through the garden or sit in the library surrounded by books and soft light, I know I can take care of myself without leaning on anyone. That feeling is powerful, but I also see how it stirs something ugly in my son and his wife. My daughter-in-law lets her eyes wander over the paintings as if she already owns them. My son counts the cost of every repair as if it is already his duty. They whisper about the day this house will belong to them, but they have no idea about the world of assets I keep hidden away. Sometimes at night I wonder if I made things worse by keeping secrets. The more I hide, the more greedy they seem to become. Still, I cannot risk showing them the truth. For now, this estate is both my protection and their stage. It protects me with its walls, and it holds their dreams of taking it over. I sit quietly at the center of it all, the only one who truly knows what is waiting behind the curtain. I live most of my days in this house with only one true companion, my Eskimo dog. He follows me from room to room, his white fur like a small cloud drifting at my feet. When I sit in the garden, he lies close by, ears twitching at the sound of birds. At night, when the silence grows heavy, he curls up near my chair and looks at me as if he knows my thoughts. Sometimes I whisper to him, silly little things, and he tilts his head as if he understands. In many ways, he is the only one who listens without judgment, the only one who never asks for more than my presence. Since my husband passed away, the house has felt empty in a way that no amount of furniture or light can fill. My son does not come often. When he does, it is usually because he needs something, a loan for his business, a favor, or simply to make sure he is not forgotten when the matter of inheritance comes around. His visits are short and restless, his eyes always drifting to the walls, the paintings, the furniture, as if measuring what might one day be his. I want to believe he cares, but each time he leaves I am left with the ache of doubt. My daughter-in-law wears sweetness like a well-fitted dress. Her smile is warm, her voice soft, but I know better. Behind her kind gestures lies a careful plan. She guides my son with invisible strings, nudging him closer to the image she wants me to see. She flatters me, praises the house, asks about my health, and all the while I can feel her eyes weighing my words, searching for weakness. She is clever, I give her that, but her kindness feels thin, like paper that tears if you press too hard. They try to paint me as fragile, as if my mind is slipping. My daughter-in-law hints that I forget things, that I repeat myself. I hear the way she says it to neighbors or relatives, always in a soft voice, as if worried for me. The truth is, I am not lost. I have mild diabetes, yes, and I follow my treatment faithfully. But my mind is clear, sharper than they think. I see what they are doing. I know the difference between real care and careful lies. Some nights I sit in my chair with my dog at my feet, the old clock ticking in the hall, and I feel the weight of loneliness settle in. Family should bring comfort, but instead it brings questions and hidden games. Still, I hold on to my clarity because it is the one weapon they cannot take from me. Years ago, I believed in generosity. I thought the best way to help my son and his wife build a happy life was to give them a place of their own. So I bought them a high-end apartment in the city, about an hour's drive from this estate. I remember the day I handed them the keys. Their smiles were wide, their voices full of excitement. I told myself that this was the right thing, that every mother dreams of giving her child a good start. At first, I imagined them growing closer as a family, building memories in that home. I pictured them cooking dinners together, hosting friends, laughing as they raised children in a space they could call their own. For a short while, I believed they were truly grateful. But as the years passed, I began to notice something changing. Their visits became less warm, their words less kind. The apartment I had given them no longer felt like a gift in their eyes, but a stepping stone. It was as if they had taken that gift and placed themselves on a higher rung, looking down on me as if I owed them even more. My daughter-in-law has a way of speaking that cuts deeper than she realizes, or maybe she knows exactly what she is doing. She often looks around my house with that sweet smile, then says things like, "Mother, your home is so big, it must feel lonely to live here by yourself. Wouldn't it be better if you moved closer to us in the city where we can take care of you properly?" Her words are wrapped in kindness, but the meaning behind them is sharp. I can hear the real message. She is hinting that this estate, my home, would be better in their hands. My son usually stays quiet when she speaks this way. He nods sometimes, pretending it is all out of concern for me. But I can see the flicker in his eyes. He is not blind to her hints, nor is he against them. Together they think they are gentle, subtle, but I hear every note of their song. I never expected thanks forever, but I never imagined that kindness could turn into leverage. What I meant as love became a tool they now use against me. Some nights I sit in the grand living room, the walls filled with the past, and I wonder if generosity was my mistake. Still, I cannot regret helping them, because a mother's heart always chooses hope over caution. Yet I know better now. Each word they drop, each suggestion they make, is a reminder that not every gift is remembered with love. Lately, my son and his wife have been acting as if they are doing me a favor. They offer to drive me to the supermarket, to pick out clothes, to help with little errands. To anyone looking from the outside, it might seem sweet, a picture of a caring family. But I can feel the truth behind their smiles. These rides and shopping trips are not kindness. They are setting the stage, planting seeds to make me look like I am slipping. One afternoon at the grocery store, I reached for my credit card to pay. My fingers searched through my wallet, but the card was gone. My chest tightened, my eyes darted back and forth, wondering how it could be missing. Before I could think, my son leaned closer and said with fake concern, "Mother, did you forget to bring your wallet again?" The cashier glanced at me with pity. My face burned with shame. Later, when I returned home, I found the card slipped quietly back into my bag. I knew then it was not an accident. Another day, as we walked down the street, my daughter-in-law whispered the wrong name of a neighbor just before I greeted her. Trusting her, I repeated the name, only to see confusion in the neighbor's eyes. My daughter-in-law sighed softly, gave me that sympathetic look, and said, "Mother, your memory really is getting worse." My son nodded, as if the evidence was building. Inside, I wanted to shout, to tell them I am not losing myself, but the weight of their act pressed me down. Even at meals, the game continues. My daughter-in-law insists on preparing my drinks, often fresh juice. I drink it, but later my hands tremble, my vision blurs, my body feels weak. When I ask about it, she quickly blames my diabetes. She says it must be my blood sugar again. She says it with such calm authority that others believe her. I take my medicine, I follow my diet, I keep myself steady, but her words chip away at the truth. All of these small things add up, each one a thread in the picture they are weaving. They want the world to see me as fragile, confused, and fading. They want me to appear like a burden, someone who cannot be trusted to live alone or manage her own life. I know what they are doing, but fighting it feels like standing in the middle of a stage where the script has already been written. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning when my daughter-in-law offered to take me shopping. She said there was a special sale at a supermarket outside the city, more than an hour's drive away. I wondered why we needed to go so far when there were stores much closer, but she spoke so warmly and insisted it would be worth the trip. I agreed, though a small part of me felt uneasy. My dog sat in the back seat, tail wagging, happy just to come along. The store was large and unfamiliar, aisles crowded with faces I had never seen. We spent some time walking through the rows, filling the cart with items she chose more than I did. I followed, tired but polite, thinking perhaps she just wanted company. When we finished, we rolled the bags to the parking lot. Then she turned to me and said casually, "Mother, you and the dog wait here. I'll just get gas and come right back." She smiled, as if it were nothing, and before I could answer, she slid into the car and drove off. At first I stood there calmly, clutching the leash, expecting to see the car return in a few minutes. The sun was hot, the noise of people passing around me grew louder, and slowly the minutes stretched into half an hour. My chest tightened. I did not know this place. I had no phone with me, and the crowd made me feel smaller with every second. I could sense people glancing at me, curious, maybe even suspicious, as I shifted from foot to foot with my dog at my side. The fear crept in when I realized she had no intention of coming right back. I thought of her soft voice telling neighbors about my supposed forgetfulness, the way she whispered to relatives about my memory failing, and now I understood. This was not about shopping or gas. This was part of her plan, a cruel trick to leave me stranded, so that later she could say I wandered off on my own. She wanted others to believe that I was slipping, that I could not be trusted to care for myself. As I stood in that strange parking lot, every detail of her scheme became clear. Each small act before had been leading to this moment. They wanted to build a record, a picture of me as weak and confused, a burden they could explain away when the time came to seize what was mine. I held my dog close and told myself not to panic. I knew the truth, even if they tried to twist it. But the sting of betrayal cut deep, heavier than the heat of the sun or the weight of waiting. The car disappeared down the road, and I stood alone in the middle of the wide parking lot. The sound of the engine faded until there was nothing but silence around me. I held the leash tightly, my dog pressing against my leg as if he could sense my unease. The space felt too large, the world too empty, and for a moment I thought maybe she really would come back. But the minutes ticked on and the truth grew heavier in my chest. Without warning, the sky darkened. A sharp wind swept across the open lot, carrying with it the smell of rain. Then the drops began to fall, heavy and cold, striking my hair, my arms, my thin dress. Within seconds, the drizzle turned into a downpour. My coat, the one I always wore on chilly days, was still in the back seat of her car. I wrapped my arms around myself, but it did little good. The fabric clung to my skin, and the cold sank straight into my bones. The shivers came quickly, shaking through me so hard that even my dog pressed closer, trying to share his warmth. I could feel my heartbeat racing, faster and faster, not from fear alone but from the strain of my body fighting the cold. My vision blurred, the outlines of people and cars around me bending like shadows in water. My hands trembled, my knees weakened. I knew it was my diabetes making everything worse. I tried to steady my breathing, to remind myself I had survived worse, but the pounding in my chest would not calm. Each raindrop that struck my skin felt like a reminder of the truth. This was not forgetfulness. This was not a mistake. She had left me here on purpose. The thought cut deeper than the cold. Betrayal has a weight all its own, heavier than wet clothes, sharper than icy wind. I had trusted her enough to get in that car, to believe her words about a simple errand, and now here I was, abandoned like someone who no longer mattered. I stood there shaking, the rain pouring harder, and I felt the sting of humiliation mixing with the chill. It was not just the weather breaking me down, but the cruel knowledge that someone in my own family had planned this. The parking lot was full of strangers, none of whom knew me, none of whom could see the story behind my wet face and trembling hands. I tightened my grip on the leash, whispered to my dog that we had to stay strong, and forced myself to stand taller even as the storm raged on. I was shivering so badly that I could hardly stand straight, rain pouring down my face, when I felt a gentle tug at my sleeve. My dog pulled me toward the far end of the parking lot, his nose pointed as if he knew the way better than I did. Step by step I followed him, my shoes slipping on the wet pavement, my hands shaking as I held onto the leash. Through the sheets of rain I spotted a man near a pickup truck, stacking boxes into the back. He looked up when he noticed me stumbling closer. His brow furrowed and he dropped the box he was holding. "Ma'am, are you lost?" he asked, his voice steady but touched with concern. "Do you need help?" I froze for a moment, ashamed of how I must have looked, my thin dress clinging to me, my hair plastered against my cheeks. To him I was no one important, just an old woman left out in the storm. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. I swallowed hard and finally said, "I need to get back near the X suburb. It's where my home is." My words trembled, not just from the cold, but from the weight of admitting how helpless I felt. He hesitated, glanced at his truck as if weighing whether it was safe or wise. The rain splashed harder against the metal roof, and after a pause he nodded slowly. "All right, get in," he said. "I can take you close to that area." Relief washed through me, warmer than the jacket he pulled from the cab and draped over my shoulders. I held the fabric tight, blinking through the rain as I climbed carefully into the passenger seat. My dog jumped in beside me, shaking water everywhere but curling quickly at my feet. The man closed the door gently and circled back to the driver's side. As the truck pulled out of the lot, I pressed my palms together in my lap, my chest tight with gratitude. This stranger knew nothing of me. He did not know my name, my family, or the history of the estate that waited for me in silence. To him, I was simply a frail woman left behind, and yet his kindness had become the bridge between despair and safety. In that moment, I realized how fragile life can be, how easily everything can depend on the simple mercy of a stranger. My return home that day had nothing to do with my wealth or my status. It rested entirely in the hands of a man who chose compassion over indifference. The pickup truck slowed as it rolled up to the gates of my estate. My heart ached with relief when I saw the familiar iron bars and the tall trees swaying behind them. I thanked the man quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, and stepped down onto the gravel with my dog pressed close to my legs. As the truck drove away, I noticed a figure already waiting near the entrance. It was my daughter-in-law. She stood there as if she had been expecting me, though her eyes widened in an exaggerated show of surprise. For a moment her face was a mask of shock, but it slipped almost instantly into something colder. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Mother," she said, her tone flat, "I got an urgent phone call and I must have forgotten you at the parking lot. You're all right, aren't you?" Her words sounded like an apology, but her voice carried no warmth, no hint of concern. It was as though she had misplaced a bag of groceries, not abandoned a person in a storm. The rain was still dripping from my hair, soaking the thin dress I wore. My dog shook himself, spraying water onto the ground, and I tightened my arms around him as if to shield myself from her indifference. I said nothing. My lips remained pressed together, my silence the only defense I had in that moment. But my eyes betrayed what I truly felt. Behind the calm mask, a spark had been lit. I understood now more clearly than ever. This had not been carelessness. This had been a trap, carefully laid out, meant to leave me stranded and humiliated. And though she tried to cover it with a flimsy excuse, I had seen enough. I knew the game she was playing, and I knew how close I had come to falling into it completely. I turned away without answering, walking slowly through the gates with my dog cradled in my arms. The chill of the storm still clung to my skin, but inside me there was a different kind of fire. My daughter-in-law may have believed her plan was working, but she had underestimated me. The estate loomed ahead, solid and unyielding, and I felt its strength echo inside me. I had survived the test. Now I knew the truth, and the knowledge itself was a weapon. After the long and exhausting journey back from the supermarket, all I wanted was to push open the heavy doors of my estate and sink into the safety of my home. My body still ached from the cold rain, and my clothes clung damply to my skin. I imagined myself curling into a chair with my dog at my side, finally able to rest. But the moment I stepped inside, my breath caught in my throat. The living room was alive with lights and laughter. Balloons floated near the ceiling, streamers sparkled in the glow of the chandeliers, and a large frosted cake sat proudly in the center of the table. Music played loud, voices rose in cheerful greetings, and the air buzzed with celebration. For a second I thought I had walked into the wrong house. Then I saw the guest of honor. At the head of the room stood my daughter-in-law's mother, her cheeks flushed with joy, her arms opening wide as relatives and friends sang to her. A birthday party. For her. Not for me, not for anyone in this house's bloodline, but for a guest who had turned my home into her stage. My heart squeezed painfully in my chest. I looked at the long table covered with fine linen. There, among the plates and glasses, stood bottles of rare liquor. My husband had collected them over decades, each one chosen carefully and stored like treasure. Now they were uncorked, poured carelessly into glasses, treated as if they were cheap wine bought for a casual party. The sight struck me harder than the storm had. It was not just disrespect, it was theft wrapped in festivity. The laughter continued around me, but I felt as though I were frozen at the doorway, unseen and unacknowledged. No one paused. No one noticed the woman of the house standing there drenched, holding her dog tightly against her chest. Instead, they toasted and clapped, their smiles wide, their glasses raised high, while pieces of my history disappeared with every swallow. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, louder than the music, sharper than the clinking glasses. Betrayal has many faces, I thought, and sometimes it wears the mask of celebration. I wanted to speak, to shout, to demand an explanation, but the words lodged deep in my throat. My silence became heavier than the noise of the party, pressing against me as if daring me to act. As I stepped deeper into the house, the shock only grew worse. The laughter and noise did not end in the living room. It spilled into every corner of the estate. I heard music thundering from the backyard, the kind that rattled the windows, and the splash of bodies diving into the pool. I followed the sound and saw them, relatives from my daughter-in-law's side, people I barely knew, spread across my home as if it belonged to them. They lounged in deck chairs with drinks in their hands, shouting across the water, children running through the gardens that I had once cared for so carefully. Inside was no different. I passed through the hall and nearly stopped breathing when I noticed what some of them were holding. One man clutched a silver figurine that had once sat on the mantel, a piece my husband had brought back from Europe decades ago. A woman turned a porcelain vase in her hands, laughing as if it were a toy, her fingers brushing over the delicate painted surface I had polished so many times. Every detail of the house that I had guarded with love was now treated like decoration for their amusement. When they finally noticed me, a few only glanced up with smirks that carried no respect. One of them called out, "Oh, the lady of the house is back, looking so frail. You should rest. Let the young ones handle the party." The others chuckled as though it were a harmless joke, but the words sliced straight through me. I stood frozen, gripping my dog close, the noise around me swelling louder, drowning out my voice before I could even use it. My estate, my sanctuary, had been overrun. Every wall echoed with strangers' voices, every object of value in careless hands. And I, the woman who had lived here for decades, suddenly felt like a guest. No, less than that, like an intruder in my own home. It was not only the loss of control that stung, but the look in their eyes, that mixture of pity and dismissal, as if I were already fading, already irrelevant. My dog pressed against me, and I realized he was the only soul there that still belonged to me. The rest had been claimed by laughter that was not mine, music that did not belong, and people who treated my life's treasures as though they had earned the right to them. My daughter-in-law spotted me standing there at the edge of the room, damp and silent, my dog pressed against my leg. She moved toward me quickly, her steps graceful, her face lit with a smile that looked warm to anyone else. But I knew her too well. The sweetness was painted on, her eyes too sharp, her tone too smooth. "Oh, Mother, you're back already," she said, her voice carrying that polished charm. "I was going to call you, but I thought you might be tired, so I let you rest. Anyway, today is such a special day for my mother, and I wanted her to feel welcomed in a truly grand home." The words slid out like honey, but underneath was the sting. She was not honoring me. She was reducing me, making it sound as if this estate, my husband's legacy and my own life's foundation, was nothing more than a prop for her display, a stage she could use to show off her family's importance. My chest tightened, but I did not answer. The insult was hidden enough that others might miss it, yet it cut deep enough to make me feel stripped of my place in my own house. She turned away before I could respond, as if I were no more than another guest. With practiced ease, she lifted a glass of my husband's rare wine, holding it up to clink against another guest's drink. The gesture was casual, joyful even, and she laughed lightly while the people around her followed her lead. But her eyes did not meet mine. She looked past me deliberately, ignoring the storm that must have been burning in my expression. I stood frozen, feeling the heat rise in my face, though my body was still cold from the rain. The guests cheered, raising their glasses, and I watched as my daughter-in-law basked in the glow of her performance. Every movement of hers seemed designed to claim the house as her own stage, her own kingdom, while leaving me in the shadows. I held my silence, but inside I understood. This was not carelessness or politeness, this was strategy. Her sweetness was a mask, carefully fitted, and behind it lay the steady hand of someone tightening her grip on power. I clenched my hands so tightly that my nails pressed into my palms, a small sting to remind myself to stay calm. The air in the room was heavy, filled with laughter that did not belong to me, music that did not belong in these walls, and the careless voices of people who treated my estate as if I were no longer its mistress. My heart pounded, but I held my breath steady. I could feel the truth in every glance, in every dismissive smile. My authority, my presence, the respect I had built over a lifetime was being stripped away openly, as if I were invisible. My eyes searched for my son, hoping to find in him a spark of recognition, a sliver of loyalty. But he stood there with his head lowered, his shoulders slumped, unable to meet my gaze. His hands fidgeted at his sides, his mouth opened slightly as if he wanted to speak, yet no words came. He let his wife take the stage, let her claim what was not hers, while he shrank into silence. The sight pierced me more deeply than any cruel remark could. This was my child, the boy I had raised, and yet he stood on the other side, too weak to defend me, too afraid to oppose her. Around us, the gathering continued without pause. My daughter-in-law's relatives laughed louder, toasted their glasses, and moved through the house with a sense of ownership that did not belong to them. Some of them sat comfortably in the chairs I had chosen with care, while others wandered the halls as though inspecting property they intended to keep. And I, the woman who had guarded this place for decades, was reduced to the role of an intruder, a guest no one had invited. For any woman watching, for any mother who had poured her heart into her family, this was a moment that needed no explanation. They would feel the humiliation as if it were their own, the bitter truth of being dismissed in a space that should have been a refuge. I was not just being ignored, I was being erased. Still, I did not raise my voice. I did not strike the table or demand silence. My anger burned quietly deep inside, and I wrapped it in stillness. To them it may have looked like weakness, like surrender, but I knew better. Sometimes silence is not defeat. Sometimes silence is the storm waiting to break. And as I stood there in the middle of the noise, I knew this story was not finished. They had underestimated me, and the reckoning would come after witnessing the birthday party unfold in her living room, I did not scream or raise my voice. Every part of me wanted to cry out, to demand respect, to show them that this house was not theirs to parade through. But instead, I held back. I let the corners of my mouth lift into a tired, forced smile. To the guests and to my daughter-in-law, it must have looked like surrender. My hands trembled slightly as I brushed my wet hair from my face and said softly that I was feeling unwell, that I needed to rest upstairs. The room hardly paused. A few murmurs of sympathy, a couple of nods, and then the laughter and music swelled once again. My daughter-in-law glanced at me with that cold sweetness she wore so well. I could almost hear her thoughts. She believed she had won. She believed the estate, the family, the future were already in her grasp. She believed I had no strength left to fight. I turned slowly, walking up the staircase with my dog close behind me, each step steady though my heart thundered. I kept my back straight, even as I let them think I was fragile. When I closed my bedroom door, the sound of the party grew faint, replaced by silence thick enough to breathe. I leaned against the wood for a moment, letting the mask slip from my face. My jaw tightened, and my hands curled into fists. It was there, behind the safety of that closed door, that the fire inside me truly lit. The humiliation of the day did not crush me, it sharpened me. Every insult, every careless laugh, every glance that treated me as if I were already gone, they were fuel. My daughter-in-law thought she had seen weakness. What she had really seen was patience. I sat at my desk, the one covered with papers and photographs, and I felt clarity return. The fight would not be loud, not yet. It would be measured, careful, and precise. I knew too much to let them succeed. My silence downstairs was not the end of my power. It was the beginning of something they could not see coming. From that moment, the game changed. They thought I had stepped aside. In truth, I had only stepped back, gathering the strength I would need for the strike they would never expect. In the stillness of my bedroom, I sat at the small desk near the window, the sound of the party muffled behind the closed door. My hand reached for the old landline phone, the one few people even remembered existed. Its quiet presence in my room had always been a comfort, a lifeline untouched by curious eyes. I dialed a familiar number with steady fingers, and after 2 rings, the calm, steady voice of my longtime lawyer answered. I did not waste time. Tonight had shown me enough. I told him clearly what needed to be done. First, the will must be rewritten. My son and his wife were to be removed completely from the list of heirs. They had proven themselves unworthy, and I would not allow their greed to be rewarded. Instead, the majority of my assets would go into a charitable foundation for the elderly, abandoned by their families, and the rest would be divided among a few distant relatives I trusted. Second, I instructed him to prepare documents to reclaim the luxury apartment I had once given my son and daughter-in-law. Under American law, the property was still legally mine. The title remained in my name, and what I had given was not ownership, but permission to use. That permission would now be revoked. The apartment would return to me, and with it, another symbol of control would be taken from their hands. My lawyer listened carefully, his tone steady but urgent. He assured me he would move quickly, drafting the papers immediately and arranging the necessary filings. He reminded me of the importance of silence. The less they knew, the less time they would have to prepare a counterattack. By the time the matter reached the court, it would already be decided. I thanked him, my voice low but firm. Hanging up the phone, I sat for a long moment, staring at the shadows across the room. I felt the weight of betrayal still pressing on my chest, but beneath it was something stronger. This was the first step, the opening move in a fight I had not chosen but would not lose. They believed I was weak, but tonight I had planted the seeds of a reckoning. Late that night, when the house had grown quiet and the guests were gone, I moved carefully through the dining room. The table was still cluttered with glasses, plates, and half-finished drinks. My eyes rested on the glass of juice my daughter-in-law had offered me earlier, the one that had left my hands trembling and my head spinning. I picked it up, along with a few scraps of food left behind on my plate, and slipped them into small sealable bags I had prepared. My fingers were steady, my face calm, but inside I felt the weight of what I was doing. These were not leftovers. These were pieces of truth. The next morning, I drove quietly to a private laboratory in the city, one I trusted to keep matters discreet. I handed over the sealed bags, speaking little, only asking for a full analysis of chemicals and possible contaminants. The technician looked at me with curiosity but asked no questions. I left the samples with him, walking away with my dog at my side, my heart both heavy and hopeful. 2 days later, the call came. I sat at my desk as the results were read aloud to me. There were traces of a mild sedative, enough to dull alertness without knocking someone unconscious. Alongside it was a secondary compound known to cause hand tremors, dizziness, and fatigue. My breath caught as I listened, because the description matched my symptoms exactly. The faint shakiness, the blurred vision, the waves of weakness, none of it came from my diabetes. It came from something added to what I ate and drank. I thanked the technician, my voice quiet, and wrote every detail down. When I hung up the phone, I sat still for a long while, staring at the paper in front of me. This was no longer suspicion. This was proof. Proof strong enough to take to court if necessary. Proof that stripped away every excuse my daughter-in-law had offered. For weeks she had whispered that my memory was failing, that my condition was only the result of diabetes. But the tests told another story. The truth was written in numbers and chemical names, undeniable and clear. Holding the report in my hands, I felt the power shift. The humiliation of the past days no longer seemed like weakness. Instead, it was the ground from which my strength was rising. They thought they were clever, hiding behind lies and false concern. But science does not lie, and now I had the weapon I needed. The next move would not be theirs. It would be mine. That night, long after the party had ended and the house had grown still, I sat alone in my study. The soft hum of the security system filled the room as I powered up the monitor. Few people knew the full extent of the cameras installed around the estate. My daughter-in-law believed she had mapped every corner, but there were hidden lenses she had never discovered, eyes in places she thought were private. I began to rewind the footage, scanning through days and weeks of recordings. At first, the images were ordinary: gardeners tending the lawn, deliveries at the gate, my son moving through the halls. Then the screen flickered with something else, something that made my chest tighten. There she was, my daughter-in-law, walking confidently through the front door with a couple I had never seen before. They were strangers, dressed well but clearly not guests I had invited. She guided them with a smile, pointing at the paintings, the staircase, the library, as if she were giving a grand tour of a house that belonged to her. I leaned closer to the screen as the scene unfolded. They laughed together, her gestures bold and proud. My stomach churned as I watched her stop before the cabinet where my husband's treasures had rested for years. She reached for a small wooden box, one that had once held keepsakes he cherished: letters, cufflinks, and a watch from his early business days. Without hesitation, the couple took it in their hands. The footage showed them walking away with it, their faces calm, as if theft were nothing more than an afternoon errand. I froze the frame, staring at their figures captured so clearly. This was no longer suspicion, no longer whispers of deceit. This was evidence, evidence of trespass, of theft, of betrayal played out step by step in the house I had fought to protect. Under American law, this was not just bad manners or family conflict. This was a crime, and one that carried weight in any courtroom. As I sat back in my chair, a strange calm washed over me. My hands no longer trembled, my breath no longer raced. For the first time in weeks, I felt control return. They thought they were clever, that I was blind, that their schemes would remain hidden. But the cameras had watched, the truth had been recorded, and now the law itself was on my side. A faint smile touched my lips as I closed the file and shut down the screen. The game had shifted. They believed they were winning, but they had already walked themselves into a trap of their own making. The next morning, the living room still carried the faint smell of last night's party. Empty glasses lingered on side tables, the floor was sprinkled with bits of confetti, and the air seemed heavier than usual. I had asked a few important relatives to come by, people whose opinions carried weight in the family. They arrived quietly, their faces curious, their eyes scanning the remnants of the celebration as they settled into their seats. My daughter-in-law entered gracefully, a tray of tea balanced carefully in her hands. Her smile was wide, her voice soft and sweet. "Mother, you must have been so tired yesterday," she said, setting the cups down in front of each guest. "I am sorry if the house was too noisy." She dipped her head in a show of respect, her every gesture painted to perfection, as if she were the model of a loving daughter-in-law. She served the tea with practiced ease, offering gentle nods, asking if anyone needed sugar or more biscuits. The picture she created was one of kindness and care, a young woman eager to make peace after a lively evening. My son sat beside her, saying little, his expression caught between pride and unease. He wanted to believe in the image she was painting, wanted the relatives to see him as the man with a thoughtful wife. But I watched the guests closely, and I saw what she did not. Their eyes flickered with doubt. They remembered how she had spoken so confidently the night before, how she had carried herself like the mistress of the estate. And though they smiled politely at her now, I could sense the question lingering in their minds. How could someone so gentle, so caring, be the same woman who left her mother-in-law standing alone in a distant parking lot? I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, let the performance play out in front of those who mattered most. The more she smiled, the more hollow it sounded. Every gesture of hers rang false, too smooth, too perfect. And I knew the people in that room could feel it. Inside me, anger simmered, but I kept it hidden. I folded my hands neatly on my lap and simply watched, my dog curled quietly at my feet. She believed she was winning them over, but in truth, her performance was betraying her. The sweetness was too sharp, the care too shallow, and everyone could see the cracks. For the first time, I felt the power shift in the room. She thought she was proving her loyalty. Instead, she was exposing her shamelessness. I straightened my back in the chair, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room pressing down on me. My voice, when I spoke, was steady and sharp, cutting through the soft chatter like a blade. "If you came here expecting to see a weak old woman, then I am sorry to disappoint you. I am not someone who can be fooled so easily." The room went still. My daughter-in-law froze, her smile flickering for the first time. Even my son shifted uneasily beside her. Slowly, I reached into my handbag and placed a large envelope on the table. The seal bore the name of a private laboratory. With deliberate calm, I slid the papers out, their crisp edges whispering against the wood. "These are test results," I said. "They show traces of sedatives and other chemicals in the food and drinks I was given. Chemicals that explain the tremors, the dizziness, the weakness I've experienced these past weeks." Murmurs rose among the relatives. A few leaned forward to see the documents more clearly, their brows furrowed. My son's hands twitched as though he wanted to grab the papers, but he did not move. My daughter-in-law's lips parted, yet no words came. Before the weight of that revelation could settle, I lifted the remote and pressed a button. The television screen lit up, filling the room with flickering images from the security cameras. I had cued the footage in advance, ready for this very moment. And there it was. My daughter-in-law leading two strangers through the house, her hands gesturing proudly as she showed them around. The video played on, showing the man lifting a small wooden box from the cabinet, the woman slipping it into a bag, and the three of them leaving as if nothing were wrong. The silence that followed was absolute. The party atmosphere that lingered from the day before was gone, replaced by a heavy stillness. Relatives stared at the screen, their mouths slightly open. My daughter-in-law's face drained of color. She stammered, "No, no, that's not what it looks like." But her voice cracked, thin and unconvincing. She tried to smile again, but the muscles in her face betrayed her, twisting awkwardly under the weight of the evidence. No one spoke. The proof lay in plain sight, the papers, the video, the undeniable truth. And I sat there quietly, my dog at my feet, watching as the mask she had worn so carefully began to crumble. The heavy doors of the living room swung open, and all heads turned. My longtime lawyer stepped inside, a tall man with silver hair and a calm presence that filled the space without a single raised word. In his hands was a leather folder, thick with documents. He nodded politely to the relatives seated around the room, then turned his steady gaze toward me. Without rushing, he placed the folder on the table and opened it. His voice was even, deliberate, each word carrying weight. "I am here to announce that a new will has been executed," he said. "Effective immediately, the son of the family and his wife have been removed from the list of heirs. They no longer hold any rights to the estate." The words struck the room like thunder. My son's face went pale, his mouth opening as if to protest, but no sound came out. My daughter-in-law froze, her hands clutching her skirt, eyes darting from me to the lawyer as though searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. The lawyer continued, unshaken. "Furthermore, the luxury apartment previously provided to them is hereby revoked. Under property law, as the deed remains in the lady's name, it will be repossessed and prepared for sale at public auction. The proceeds shall be directed into the trust established in her name." Gasps rippled across the room. Some of the older relatives exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock and grim satisfaction. My daughter-in-law's painted mask slipped further, the sweetness gone from her face, replaced by disbelief. My son leaned forward, whispering, "This can't be legal." But the lawyer was ready. "Every action has been taken in accordance with American law," he said firmly. "The paperwork is complete, the filings are in process. What you have heard today is final." The silence that followed was thicker than stone. My relatives sat straighter, their eyes turning toward me with newfound respect. This was no longer about whispered suspicions or private grievances. This was law, signed and sealed, the kind of decision that could not be undone by charm or manipulation. I sat quietly, my dog resting at my feet, and allowed the weight of the moment to settle. My enemies thought they had stripped me of power, but here was proof, solid, legal proof, that the house, the fortune, the future were mine to guard. And in that instant, I saw clearly that justice was not only possible, it was already unfolding. Dot. The room was already tense when the sound of a firm knock echoed from the front door. Everyone turned their heads, and moments later 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. The living room, once filled with the false sweetness of my daughter-in-law's performance, fell silent. The lead officer adjusted his cap, his expression professional yet unmistakably serious. He spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the room. "A formal complaint has been filed," he said, "along with substantial evidence of unlawful entry and theft of property." His words dropped like stones into the stillness, each one striking harder than the last. My daughter-in-law trembled where she stood. The mask she had worn so carefully only hours before shattered in an instant. Her legs buckled slightly as she clutched the back of a chair for balance. Then, as though her strength gave way, she burst into tears, her sobs echoing across the marble floor. "Please, it's not what it looks like," she cried, her hands reaching out in desperation. "I didn't mean, I didn't—" But her words dissolved into incoherent pleas. My son sat frozen beside her, his face pale, his eyes lowered. He could not look at me, could not meet the gaze of the relatives who watched in stunned silence. His lips moved as if to speak, but no sound came. The man I had raised was lost in shame, unable to defend his wife, unable to defend himself. Around us, the relatives from her side shifted uneasily. Their laughter, so loud the night before, was gone. They whispered to each other, faces flushed, some refusing to meet my eyes. One by one, they began to slip toward the door, their departure quiet, hurried, and heavy with disgrace. The chaos of sobbing and shame filled the room, but I did not rise. I remained seated in my chair at the center of the living room, my dog at my feet, my posture steady. My gaze swept the space, cold yet calm, as if I had been waiting for this moment all along. The police officers stood firm, the evidence already secured, the law now carrying the weight that I no longer had to bear alone. And there, in the heart of my home, the story reached its highest note. My daughter-in-law collapsed to the floor, her cries breaking apart under the weight of her humiliation. My son bowed his head, silent, powerless. And I sat tall in the house that was mine, serene yet unyielding, watching the mask of deceit crumble once and for all. The confrontation in my living room did not stay within these walls for long. News has a way of traveling quickly, especially when pride and scandal are involved. Within days, the whispers spread across the neighborhood. Friends, neighbors, even my daughter-in-law's colleagues at her office learned the truth, that she was under police investigation for drugging me and for stealing property from my home. What had once been her carefully polished reputation began to crack and crumble in public view. The damage deepened when videos and photos from the birthday party surfaced online. Guests who had filmed the night on their phones shared the clips without hesitation. There she was, smiling boldly as she paraded through my house, pointing at the chandeliers and the artwork as though she were the owner. There she was again, laughing beside her mother while bottles from my husband's private collection were opened like cheap wine at a picnic. Each image, each recording became undeniable proof of her arrogance. The community's reaction was swift. Friends who once admired her pulled away. Some stopped returning her calls, others deleted her from their circles without a word. At her workplace, the rumors could not be ignored. A woman accused of poisoning her own mother-in-law was not the kind of colleague anyone wanted to be associated with. It wasn't long before she lost her job, her employer citing damage to the company's reputation. The neighbors who used to smile politely now shook their heads when her name was mentioned. Some pitied her, but most ridiculed her, their voices sharp with judgment. On sidewalks and in grocery stores, she could feel the stares, could hear the whispers. The woman who once presented herself as the model of success and responsibility was now a walking scandal, her name tied to shame. For so long she had carried herself as the one in control, manipulating my son, staging scenes to undermine me, trying to position herself as the mistress of my estate. Now, stripped of her mask, she was nothing more than a cautionary tale. What she thought was power had turned to dust. What she thought was admiration had turned into laughter behind her back. In the end, she had not just lost the inheritance she craved. She had lost her place in the eyes of the world. And there is no disguise, no performance sweet enough to erase that kind of fall dot. My son, who had sat in silence for so long, letting his wife speak for both of them, now faced the cost of his blindness. For years he had followed her lead, nodding along, closing his eyes to the signs, too afraid or too weak to stand against her. He had thought that siding with his wife would bring him comfort, security, perhaps even power. But in the end, it had stripped him of everything. The court papers were clear. The luxury apartment he once called home was no longer his. The title had never left my name, and now it would be repossessed and sold. The inheritance he thought he would one day rely on was gone as well, erased by the new will. He had gambled his loyalty and lost. There was no more safety net, no more secret reserves waiting for him. I heard him whisper to himself, a broken apology that carried no weight. Regret had finally reached him, but it came too late. The law had already spoken, and its decisions were not undone by tears or shame. Every asset, every symbol of stability he had counted on, slipped out of his hands. Worse still, he was not free of responsibility. By standing beside his wife, by turning a blind eye to her actions, he had made himself complicit. The investigation did not spare him. Papers labeled his silence as a form of protection for her crimes. Now, he too faced consequences, legal, financial, and social. He was no longer just a man who had lost wealth. He was a man marked by failure, by scandal, by the choice to betray his mother. I watched him from across the room, his head bowed, his hands covering his face. To the relatives, to the friends who once admired him, he was no longer the promising son, the successful husband. He was a warning. His downfall was not just about greed, but about the cost of choosing the wrong side. For me, the pain was sharp, but there was also a strange sense of justice. The audience of life, those who had followed this story, would see both the heartbreak and the fairness. the ache of a mother abandoned by her son, and the satisfaction of knowing that betrayal never goes unpunished. After everything had unfolded, I made my decision clear. Standing in the center of the grand hall, I let my words fall with the weight of finality. This house will never again open its doors to the ungrateful. The sound carried through the space, steady and absolute, and I knew it was the last they would ever hear within these walls. I instructed my lawyer to prepare the proper papers, leaving no room for doubt. My son and his wife were to be legally barred from the estate. From this moment on, they would be treated as strangers, with no rights to enter, no claim to the life built here. The documents were signed, stamped, and filed. The law stood beside me, sealing the boundary as firmly as the iron gates outside. And so, the house returned to silence. The laughter of pretenders no longer echoed through its halls. The heavy footsteps of arrogance were gone. The estate, once stained by betrayal, breathed again with dignity. Only my loyal Eskimo dog remained at my side, his presence a reminder that loyalty does exist, even when it seems rare in the world. The evenings became my favorite time. As the sun dipped low, the garden glowed gold, its trees casting long shadows across the grass. I would sit in my armchair by the window, a book open in my hands, the quiet rustle of its pages the only sound. My dog stretched out beside me, his soft fur warm against my leg, his breath calm and steady. The contrast was striking. Where once there had been chaos, now there was peace. Where voices had shouted and schemes had grown, now there was only the gentle hum of the earth settling into dusk. The estate stood tall again, not as a battlefield, but as a sanctuary, its stillness a symbol of power reclaimed. In that quiet, I felt no loneliness. The walls no longer mocked me with memories of betrayal. They wrapped around me with strength, with a promise that this chapter of disgrace had ended. The house, my fortress, was mine once more, uncontested, untouchable, and whole. I came to understand that holding on to wealth only fed the eyes of the greedy. The more I kept it close, the more it became a target, a lure for those who had no respect for the life it represented. So I chose differently. Instead of letting my fortune rot in the hands of those who would misuse it, I directed it where it belonged. The majority of my estate was turned into a charitable fund for the elderly who had been abandoned, people left behind in silence with no one to care for them. It was more than a legal act. It was a message. Age does not mean weakness. Age can mean clarity, the power to choose what matters. By placing my resources into the hands of those who needed them most, I was reminding the world, and myself, that true strength lies in giving, not in hoarding. I did not need recognition. No plaques, no ceremonies, no speeches with my name. All I needed was the quiet knowledge that someone out there, perhaps an old woman sitting alone without family, would have a meal, a blanket, or a safe place to rest because of what I had done. That was enough. That was legacy. The estate, once a battleground, now felt like a sanctuary. The air was no longer thick with suspicion, but fresh with peace. In the evenings, I would walk through the garden with my Eskimo dog trotting by my side. The flowers leaned toward the fading sun, the trees whispered in the breeze, and the gravel path crunched softly beneath my feet. One evening, as I paused by the fountain, I caught myself smiling. It was not the smile of victory, nor the smile of pride, but something gentler, a smile of peace. In my heart, the words came quietly, almost like a prayer. Perhaps the truest justice is not revenge, but watching the wicked destroy themselves. And perhaps true happiness is nothing more than the calm I hold in my hands right now. I once believed I had lost everything, but the truth is, I was only beginning to live again. And maybe the fairest justice is not revenge at all, but letting the wicked destroy themselves. Now I ask you, what matters more to you? Would you choose the fire of revenge or the calm of happiness? Share your thoughts, take a stand, and let the world know which path you believe leads to true freedom.